And we're live. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today we have Jess Seaton on the program. Jess and I met around 10 years ago in Tel Aviv. We actually haven't spoken in quite some time, but I, a few days ago, made a video about the 4 hostages that were rescued. I shared that I felt it was bittersweet because, on one hand, it's amazing that they were returned to their families. On the other hand, I felt that it would only decrease the chance that we would get the other hostages out alive. Because it would make Israel less inclined to to negotiate a deal to get them back, and it will also make the cost of holding them a little more expensive. Not even financially, but just the idea that there might be a rescue mission. After that rescue mission, there was a command from Hamas that no more hostages will ever be rescued alive, that if something like that happens, they should be executed on the spot. So I felt like it was bittersweet. Jess seemed to not fully agree with my statement, and she messaged me asking if I'd be willing to have a conversation about it. And I said, sure. Would you like to do it on a live stream setting? She agreed. So here we are. So Jess, I'd love to just give you the floor to share where you disagree with me, where you think I went wrong, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. So hi. I think it wasn't that I disagreed with you. I think I disagreed with the certain points you made. I obviously agree that it's definitely bittersweet. I think it will make things a lot harder for the hostages that are still there. I think it's going to make, I think it will be a lot harder as well for Israel to be able to make a deal with Hamas. But I just think it was like some of the points you made in trying to make that point that I kind of didn't fully agree with. I mean, I think there was parts where you talked about numbers and how many people were, especially the civilian toll, I guess you would call it, and how many of the Palestinian civilians were injured or died at the time. And I really I hate when numbers like that are thrown around, especially that we know right now that numbers get exaggerated. And I think everybody can kind of agree at the same time that there's a really big difference in what I think Hamas in the moment considers civilian casualties compared to like Hamasnikim casualties. And in saying that all of the people who were counted in the, whether it was 100 or I think at some point it was 250, I think at some point it went up to 750. I didn't agree with these numbers because, I mean, we were talking, especially in this exact example, we were talking about civilians that were holding the hostages in their homes. And I don't think you can call a civilian, I don't think you can call the people who are holding them civilians. So I think there was just a list of kind of things that in trying to make your point that I disagreed with, although I agree with the point in full.
Okay, so I'm actually very happy you started with that point, because if there's one part of the video that I would change, it's my wording around civilian casualties. I said over 100 civilians were killed. A safer wording would have been countless civilian killed, and certainly more civilians were killed than hostages rescued. The reason, the way I got to the number 100, and it certainly was a speculative estimate, the official number that was put out was 270 something.
Originally.
Well, that's still the number they're saying. They're still saying 270 something. Now, we have seen from past examples that the number is inflated. Whenever there's an attack and then there's an immediate report of civilian casualties, that number has been seen to be inflated. So I reduced the number by nearly a third. And the reason I know that countless civilians were killed is because there's videos of the aftermath of the attack and piles of dead bodies and many dead children. They are civilians. I would agree with you that if a civilian is holding a hostage, they are no longer a civilian. But we saw that the market was attacked. It seemed it was attacked as a diversion tactic. And there's video evidence showing dozens of dead bodies, including many children. So I estimated 100, but I do agree that I should have said countless dead civilians. It would have been safer. I don't think it changes much the ultimate point that the amount of damage we caused is not worth bringing these 4 home. And do you ultimately think that we should have gone forward with that?
What do you mean it's not worth bringing them home?
Well, I think there's a few ways to look at this. If you're someone who values all civilian life equally, you would say, okay, it's not worth killing 10 civilians to bring back 4 civilians. That's one way to look at it. But let's say you don't value the lives of Palestinians nearly to the same extent you value the lives of Israelis, and that's the position many Israelis hold. And most Palestinians don't value the lives of Israelis to nearly the same extent they value the lives of Palestinians, right? That's generally how people look at things, especially with populations they're in conflict with.
Well, I mean,
But
I don't think that they value their own citizens with the same way we value ours.
yeah, the Palestinians have a much stronger relationship with martyrdom in the afterlife than we do. Jews aren't big on afterlife. Sometimes you'll see like a bereaved family saying, "At least my son died fighting for his country," as like a coping mechanism, as trying to make sense of it. But yeah, we don't have nearly the same relationship with martyrdom in the afterlife, and for that reason, Israel does value life to a much greater extent than the average Palestinian.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
generally they consider their citizens we had two hostage deals that progressed in the beginning of the war, right? November
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
early November and I think early December, in which we traded how many Israeli hostages for how many Palestinian prisoners.
Yeah, it was like I don't remember the exact numbers, like
It's 1 to
yeah,
31 or 1
yeah,
to
yeah,
36,
yeah,
right?
something like that. Mhm.
So they even don't value in a one-to-one
Yeah,
deal.
yeah, I don't think there's a debate there. I think it's quite clear. I don't know if I don't know if that's the best example,
But
because
but if that's
that's
how they value their prisoners, um, so
I don't think that's how they value their prisoners. I think
so
that's
if
just
30 of them died to save one of us, that's kind of their
it's more so that's how much they know we value our prisoners, that they know they can make a request and we will agree to that request. So that's just them being good negotiators. I think the case about them
okay.
not valuing life is really that whenever somebody dies, they died for a cause. They're going to heaven. They're getting all these rewards, and Hamas does benefit from Palestinian civilians dying because it's bad PR for Israel, and it isolates us internationally, which is one of the reasons why I think every time we go into Gaza, they essentially win because of the PR toll it takes on us and the international and local support they get from our operations there. I did want to finish this one point though. Let's say if you're not valuing Palestinian life to the same extent you value Jewish life or Israeli life, I still think that there's a very strong case that this rescue mission is net negative. Um, Hamas came out and said that 3 hostages were killed in the rescue operation. I don't know if that's true. Generally, if you don't show proof, that you shouldn't be believed, whether you're Israel or Hamas. That's a good rule of thumb. Both sides do have a history of misinformation and an incentive to do so. But um, for the reason that we are less likely to agree to a deal, and for the reason that the hostages are now probably being better guarded. If there isn't another rescue operation, they most likely won't be returned alive, or it's possible hostages have been executed because the cost of guarding them is much greater. So I think it doesn't matter if you value all life equally, or if you value Israeli life over Palestinian life. I still think it was a reckless decision. And again, bittersweet. I was ecstatic to see that they were returned alive, but when I look at the big picture, it does make me a little bit sad because we don't know how many left are alive, but I think somewhere in the dozens, maybe 100 plus, and I think we should prioritize getting them back more than anything else. And it doesn't seem like the leadership agrees with that idea. They value continuing the war more than bringing them back alive. It's hard to see.
Okay, I'm gonna put it out there just so it's like on record in front of whoever is watching. I 100% value every innocent life equally. Israeli, Palestinian, I don't care where you live, of what race, like anything. any innocent life I value 100% equally. Again, I think that where my point lies is that they don't value their people the same way that you and me value their people even. Like, I think they would generally in holding, think about the mess that is right now in Gaza. Okay, like majority of Gaza is rubble. Like people have been displaced from their homes. They are now huddled in very like, never mind that Gaza is small generally, but they're huddled in extremely small like humanitarian areas where we're not supposed to hit, which I don't think we should be hitting humanitarian areas. But the fact that Israel finds our hostages in those areas, what do? Not go in, not try and save them? Like if they value their civilians, knowing that our primary goal is, or at least should be, rescuing our hostages, why are they surrounded by civilians? They know that they're going to get killed. They know
Yeah,
that something's going to
well,
happen.
yeah, they know they're so the reason why Hamas
And
is
obviously the point of hiding them there or putting them there is in hopes that we won't go in and go through.
exactly.
Right. So, but I think Israel's made it very clear that their priority, or one of their top priorities, which I believe it should be the first, but priority is to rescue our hostages. They can't expect us to not go in there.
So I think that on the point of like Hamas embedding themselves within civilian infrastructure, I think there's two reasons they do that. The first reason is because it makes it much harder for Israel to fight them. If they were to have their military infrastructure completely separate from civilian infrastructure, we could destroy it in a day. Their military is not nearly as strong as ours, so the only way they can actually fight us is by embedding themselves in civilian infrastructure. Then the fact
Hamas is
that
a lot stronger than we give them credit for.
right, but they don't have air defense systems. They don't have any air force. They don't have a navy. So if
No,
all
but
their
they have a full underground like world going on in there.
correct, then that's literally under civilian infrastructure, right? So if it wasn't under civilian infrastructure, it would be much easier to target. The only way they can actually effectively fight us is by hiding within civilian infrastructure. The second benefit is when civilians die, it's bad PR for Israel, and it isolates Israel and increases global sympathy for Hamas. So that is their strategy, but them being evil should not excuse our evil actions in return. So there's this idea that most Israelis, when you ask them about the conflict, they will nonstop just point fingers and blame the other side. And I think that in order to actually make progress here, it requires a level of introspection from both sides. Because when you really look at it, both sides have done horrible shit to each other, and should be held accountable for that. And I could tell you for days all the things Israel has done wrong. And then when I hear somebody just point fingers, say, but Hamas, but Hamas, but Hamas, it sounds like a deflection and a lack of will to take personal responsibility. When we see somebody do this in an interpersonal context, we would view them as emotionally mature. They're like, oh, they don't take responsibility. They just point fingers. But when you do it with between nations, it's like the norm and it's accepted. I actually think we need to take more responsibility. So I don't agree that we are rescuing the hostages alive is nearly our primary motivation. And I'll give you a clear example. There were a lot of burnt bodies on October 7th. Most of them were burnt by helicopter Hellfire missiles. Israel had a policy that anybody crossing into Gaza would be shot with this Hellfire missile. That was a lot of Hamasnikim alongside hostages that they were carrying. Um, so we decided that we are going to kill. This is the Hannibal doctrine, right? This is a doctrine that Israel follows. We're going to kill our own hostages just so they're not hostages, and that's exactly what we did. And we don't know how many dozens or hundreds of Israeli civilians were killed crossing back into Gaza.
I mean, I think at this point we do.
No, because Israel's not going to.
We don't. Israel knows.
Oh yeah, they're not going to report it. We don't know the exact amount of civilians that were killed by Israeli tank fire and Hellfire missiles. But to say that we value the hostages' lives over anything else, I mean, I think the proof is in the pudding that we don't. And also the fact that we could have gotten the hostages out months ago and we refused to sign a deal means, again, we're not valuing their lives. That's not our primary focus. And I get it. The deal is not so favorable. I understand the risk of
Absolutely
releasing.
not favorable.
Right. I understand the risk of releasing a few thousand Palestinian prisoners, but I value the lives of those hostages more than I value keeping terrorists in jail. I think that I think me personally, I would get them out, and I would sign a deal. I would end the war, and I would move forward from there. The longer we wait, the more dying in captivity, and it's a shame. 70 have died in captivity. They could have been alive, and they could have been home with their families. Who knows how many more are still locked up in some room? Either maybe one day they'll be saved, or they'll die in captivity like 70 others. So it's hard for me to accept that is our approach here.
Okay, so I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are held currently prisoners in Israel that are Palestinian,
Yeah.
these are people who have been arrested and taken prisoners for what? For throwing stones, for throwing grenades or
Yeah.
Molotov
We have,
cocktails, or attempted murder, or murdering our soldiers, or whatever. In the current state of the world after October 7th,
mm-hmm.
it was promised October 7th, October 8th, October 10th, October again and again and again and again. Allowing out that amount of prisoners who already have that goal to add to the amount of current Hamasnikim, or let's say Hamas militants or resistance fighters or whatever they want to call them, to allow that many more people. Listen, October 7th wasn't just someone turned around and went, okay, guys, I'm going to crush down this fence, run. This was something that was planned. They went to Iran to train for it. They didn't just walk through or come in cars. They came down on what do you call it? Paragliding?
Paragliders, yeah.
Like, this was something that was planned. Imagine if there's an additional few hundred of them or a few thousand of them who come back, and in 6 months we do the ceasefire. We say Israel accepts everything, goes, you know what? We'll pull fully out of Gaza. Gaza returns. Even, that's not even only what Israel's saying. Israel's saying not only will we pull out of Gaza, or what the world wants right now is that Israel will pull out of Gaza, rebuild Gaza, as well as continuing to provide just as much aid, if not more aid, than we're providing right now, which, by the way, the amount of aid we're providing right now is more aid than was going into Gaza pre-October 7th.
For sure, yeah.
So now we're going to resupply them with everything. And by the way, I know you're not here, but with all of the additional aid we've been providing in a couple of months, 2 weeks ago, we had again missiles in Tel Aviv. Yesterday morning, we had them. Like, it was just, it's the longer we allow it to continue, the longer we allow it to continue. You know what I mean? Like, if we walk out, we allow them to rebuild, re-strengthen, and do it again. So I do see where, okay, we need to divide this plan between, yes, we need our hostages back, and yes, we can't allow this to continue happening anymore. So there has to be somewhere that is like a middle ground. And no, I don't think that middle ground will ever be found. It will have to be, or we rescue all of our hostages on our own, or they'll wind up being like the 3 hostages that are there from 2014 and 2015.
Right. So on the prisoner swap, I definitely understand that it's not a great deal, but I want to explain it, just share a different way of looking at it. So first of all, there's around 8,000 Palestinian prisoners, and over 2,000 of them have not had trial or been charged. So that's just worth noting, that not all of them have been proven to be guilty. Some of them, though, certainly have blood on their hands. It's true that releasing people who have committed acts of violence against Israelis there is a chance that they return and try to commit more acts of violence. We see this to be the case after the Gilad Shalit deal. But I think that our approach is actually creating far more terrorists than releasing 2,000. We have killed a few tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza. The amount of trauma and radicalization we're seeing in Gaza now is unlike any we've seen before. There's
I
not
mean,
less, there's not less extreme.
1,000%, but you can say that going back to the Nakba,
For sure. I think has
100%.
Israel has continued. Israel focuses on primarily policies that give short-term security, but ultimately radicalize the Palestinian population. It's not for no reason that Palestinians are now more radical than they have ever been.
The EU is funding Hamas
And
for how many years?
yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. But and also Israelis are the most radical they've ever been because conflict radicalizes us. So the whole idea that we're reducing the amount of terrorists in Gaza, I think that's not the way to look at it. I think there's more potential terrorists in Gaza than there's ever been. The amount of bereaved fathers, the amount of orphan children, they don't have anything to live for. They're going to
1,000%.
fight the entity that destroyed their family.
But
So
this will continue going on for more 1,000 years because
well,
of
it
what happened.
but it doesn't have to. So it's almost like saying we refuse to release 2,000 terrorists because we don't want more terrorists in the world, but let's engage in actions that are going to produce tens of thousands of terrorists. It doesn't really make
Both
any.
will do the same because the only solution to that in itself and to limiting or not creating more terrorists is
Exactly.
only education
Education and making more hospitable environmental conditions that can, reduce extremism.
or
Um,
government,
Yeah, so
their
this whole
government.
idea is that we're not going to release our hostages alive because we don't want to release terrorists in the world. So instead, we're going to let the hostages die and engage in a way that's just going to produce more terrorists in Gaza. Seems honestly kind of crazy and short-sighted. I would say that the biggest problem with releasing prisoners is the injustice it causes to the families of the victims of these terrorists, right? Because if your family member was killed by a you know by a terrorist and now that terrorist is being released, that will cause that family a lot of pain. I get that. I would say that is in my opinion the biggest consideration. And yeah, there's definitely a risk releasing violent people out into the world, but our actions now are just creating way more violent people. Now when it comes to October 7th and it happening again, October 7th was less a Hamas victory than it was an Israeli failure. It was entirely avoidable. We took multiple brigades out of the Gaza envelope days and weeks before to put them in the West Bank. There was only one brigade there. We had multiple warnings about a terror attack coming. We had not only people say it was an intelligence failure, but it actually wasn't because the Shin Bet warned the military about it. They had intel that something like this would happen.
Egypt warned twice.
Hmm?
Egypt warned twice.
Egypt warned, and even U.S. intelligence had insight about this. There are many warnings. The Tatzpitaniyot, which is the unit that views the cameras on the fence, they were saying they're seeing a lot of suspicious activity. So it was a massive military failure on Israel's part that could have been avoided with much better security. So this whole idea that we need to engage aggressively in a way that will kill tens of thousands of civilians, hundreds of our own soldiers, and who knows how many dozens of our hostages, only to not defeat Hamas. And I think this is an important point. I actually don't think Hamas will be defeated. I don't think we have the capabilities to defeat them.
Hamas is an ideology now. It's
As
no longer just a
Exactly.
militia
And the U.S. fought the Taliban for 20 years. The U.S. is the strongest military in the history of the world, and after
and
20
lost.
years, they had nothing to show for. So the amount of damage and destruction we're causing, not only the loss of civilian life, the loss of our own hostages, the radicalization of the Palestinian people, the global sympathy and support Hamas gets, and the isolation Israel is facing, all for Hamas to remain in power. Hard to make sense of this. But when you actually look at it, Benjamin Netanyahu he wants a prolonged war to remain in power. The Israeli
Stay
public
out
is
of jail.
it is exactly the Israeli public is rightfully furious, so they want to see some kind of revenge, or they want something done about it, so that they're supporting this. When you actually look at the benefit of what we're doing, uh, this seems it's so net negative. It's going to be one of the darkest stains on Israel's history. It's not going to make the situation better. Actually, I don't want to say it's not going to make the situation better. We don't know how the status quo will change, but the amount of destruction that we're seeing just for Hamas to remain in power, it's hard to it's hard to be okay with this.
I
You
mean,
you want to keep the fight going, huh?
no, so it's absolutely like I wish, so here's my thing is like I think everybody wants to see it end. I would like to see it end. I've just moved apartments so that I cannot be like in a place in the country where I'm getting sirens anymore. That
Yeah.
I have a mamad, which is a bomb shelter inside my apartment, and I no longer have to run down all the stairs. Of course, like I'm not like sitting here going, oh, I love this adrenaline rush and I want this to keep going and I want to see as many killed as possible. It's absolutely not what I want. What I want is to see that every year we're not going to have rockets for no reason. I want to see like this change in both sides directive or opinions, that we no longer need to continue having these operations or these fights. Like I don't think that this anymore should be or still is about only October the 7th. I think
Mhm.
October the 7th was one absolutely tragic, horrific day that was the like final explosion on like this like the gas that hit the matches kind of thing, where we've just kind of both sides have been teeter-tottering this, almost there, we're almost there, we're almost there, boom, fire ignited, war starts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that from all of this, our government, along with, I think the world needs the rest of the governments, not just the United States, because they can't just be the only ones. It needs to be everyone who comes together to help to figure this out. Because at this point, like Hamas is obviously an Iranian proxy. Iran has a big thing. They're teamed with, Russia, and Israel's teamed with the US and whatever. It actually like comes that the whole world is part of this.
Hmm.
And so I think it does need to be like, the big superpowers that figure out how to stop the whole problem, and not just, what happened last May or what happened on October 7th or what happened 2 years ago or whatever. Like
Yeah.
it needs to be like stopped. All of these like mini operations and wars, like they all of them have to stop.
Hmm.
That's the
Yeah.
only way we'll find peace.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's really no simple solution. I think that because it doesn't seem like there's a clear military route to actually solve this problem, and this has been one of our mistakes since day one, that we feel like there's no better security than by being strong. But there's actually no better security than having peace. And we haven't been dedicated to the peace process to nearly the same extent we've been dedicated to militarism. And we see where that has led us, to the largest massacre of Jews on any day since the Holocaust. That's what us being tough and strong, and this policy of kind of kicking the can down the road and maintaining the status quo. This is where it led us. We need to be heavily invested in diplomacy. And again, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not like we have a great partner for peace, but we also haven't been a great partner for peace. So I think step one is for us to actually be a great partner. We'll be in a much better position to complain about them once we're proving that we're a good partner for peace. To
But
give
that's
hope.
like, so what? We just pull out, we go, okay, we're done. And
So I'll share some thoughts. What I think we could do. So few people know that when Hamas was elected in 2006, they actually reached out to Israel and offered a 10-year truce. The terms of the truce weren't so favorable. It was requesting some right of return, and that Jerusalem would be the capital of Palestine. But it's not like we said, okay, let's take this offer as an opportunity to negotiate and meet in the middle and find some 10-year truce. Instead, we said, no, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We're not gonna negotiate on any terms, and we're gonna blockade Gaza, which is an act of aggression. And again, I can understand our rationale to wanting to blockade Gaza, not letting them import as many weapons as they want. But it was a huge missed opportunity that we didn't engage them when they offered that 10-year truce.
We've offered so many over years.
Well, we had some negotiations with this was with the Palestinian Authority. We haven't really done negotiations with Hamas. They offered it and we rejected it. And again, we did try with the Palestinian Authority. We were pretty damn close at some points, but then we stopped. It's been 15 years. We haven't done any negotiation. We haven't tried, and we see the deteriorating conditions in Gaza and the West Bank, and how the population there is becoming increasingly radical because
But on whose responsibility does that fall?
well, Israel controls a lot of the environment in which Palestinians
And
live.
you're talking electricity and water, I'm assuming,
No, not only that. So,
and incoming humanitarian aid, or
yeah,
incoming anything that they're trying to get from abroad.
well, yeah, we could focus on the West Bank or Gaza, but I'll give examples in both. So in the West Bank, you know, Palestinians aren't taught great things about us in school, but then their teachings are very much reinforced by their day-to-day experience. The only Israelis West Bank Palestinians meet are settlers and soldiers, neither of whom treat them with dignity and respect. There's settlers are becoming increasingly violent, and the IDF is doing. You said not true?
Is that the truth? That's
Oh
the
yeah,
only people that they come in contact with, and the amount of people that work in the center of the country, whether it be in construction or
that's really a minority. That's really a minority, and even the ones that come in, it's not like they're having conversations and interactions with Israelis. Most Israelis aren't hateful towards Palestinians. They're just indifferent. Um, but most Palestinians are not coming into Israel proper every day to work. They're interacting with settlers. They're interacting with soldiers. Um, Settlers are increasingly violent, and the IDF does very little to stop that. And the IDF is often acting in a way that is demeaning and degrading. They don't treat them with dignity and respect. So there's a lot we can do to change the interactions that Palestinians are having with Israelis. We could replace the IDF in the West Bank with a peacekeeping force of Israelis and Palestinians. That everyone speaks fluent Arabic. They're held accountable if they ever abuse their power. They treat Palestinians with dignity and respect. And Palestinians view this peacekeeping force as protectors of themselves as well. So if a Palestinian has a problem, they know they could go to this force and that force will help them. Instead, this force is security for Israel and oppression for Palestinians, right? So this just further radicalizes them, right? So that's a change we could do. In Gaza, we very much have had a policy that every few years we respond to rocket fire with, as we described it, mowing the lawn, which has always killed in all operations, has killed 1,000+ civilians, has injured tens of thousands more, and has traumatized virtually all Palestinians. So to think that this is not a radicalizing force, our policy, I mean, it certainly is. These
okay.
are policy decisions we're making.
Okay. I'll touch on the second topic because I think I have more feeling towards it than your first. The second topic is, what'd you say? Every few years we respond back to rocket fire, right?
We mowed the lawn as we described it, yeah, by
I
dropping.
don't know. I've never heard mowing
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lawn
That's how
before.
an Israeli military official described it, that every few years we go and we mow the lawn. And the way we mow the lawn is dropping thousands of high-powered bombs on a heavy, densely populated area.
You lived here for how long?
14 years.
And out of 14 years, how many years did you experience rockets to Tel Aviv?
Um, I think the first time was 2014. There was one or two rockets.
Pre-2K10, and then 2K10 happened,
And then
right?
there was 2021, there were a few, and then recently there were more than ever before.
So I moved here in 2013, and every year since I've been here, starting in 2013, I remember the first time I heard a rocket siren, I like hid underneath the sink in the kitchen of the person whose house I was staying because I just had no education and no idea what to do. By the way, anybody listening to this, don't hide underneath a porcelain sink. It's like not the safest place to stay.
Fair, yeah.
Every single year since I moved here 11 years ago, I've experienced rocket fire. Now, to say that every couple of years we respond, I think it's nice. Not to say like I think that mowing the grass or however you put it, like we shouldn't be like, I think now another way that people are saying it is like carpet bombing or whatever. Like,
Carpet bombing is a very specific type of bombing, which it seems like we've done something akin to that. And we've seen like full neighborhoods completely destroyed. So people describe that as carpet bombing, but yeah.
But the fact that we come back with it every few years. Now, the other side to this is Israel, since the beginning in 48, decided to invest in the Iron Dome. Israel cares about its citizens, and therefore they've invested in a defense before investing as much in an offense. Okay? Right?
No. We've invested in the Iron Dome, but we spent a lot.
We invest in an offense, I agree, but we also hugely invest in a defense.
Yeah.
A defense that not the PA and not Hamas has taken any liberties to do the same for their own.
Correct.
Okay. Even the spokesperson for Hamas years ago, before October 7th, said, "What do you mean? Why should we allow our civilians into our tunnels underground? The land that Gaza is on is refugees, and therefore the UN should take care of them. We take care of us." So they won't even allow their citizens underneath to hide from, or to have any defense at all, any place to hide from what we send to them. Now, if we decide let's turn off all of the Iron Dome, we would be in the same position. We would, with all of the rockets that they've sent to us, we would be with the same, likely the same amount of people killed, if not more. We have highly dense places, and they send a lot of rockets here.
Yeah, I don't think it would
have
be
a lot more dead, and the whole thing of the world that the death toll in Gaza is so high. We would also have a death toll, but we have the Iron Dome. It's not like we're sitting here not getting that from them. We're lucky that we have that defense system.
I'm not sure what the point is that you want to make the case that Hamas is bad. There's no disagreement here. Obviously, they don't care for their civilian population. You know that we established.
I'm saying that we experience what we experience from them, and like they need to as well change how they're acting. They can't always be sending this resistance.
There's we can sit here and talk all day about Hamas and all the horrible things they do, or how all the bad things Palestinians have done. And again, I do this. You know, I could debate both sides of the conflict equally well because both sides have done.
Definitely, I can play devil's advocate.
Yeah, for me, it's not even devil's advocate. I think there's very legitimate criticism of both sides. But here we have two Israelis having a conversation. It seems a little bit off to focus on why they're bad rather than focusing on what our people and our government can do to change the situation.
But a thousand things, but I don't think we can sit and have a full argument without seeing where both sides have gone wrong. Our government is absolutely so far from perfect. But like in your first point, when we bring it back to what happened in the West Bank, and that you see that we should set up like a peaceful.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my question with that. I think it's like a cool idea, probably would never happen. There's no way. But that changes only on us, right? Like,
wait, you think there's no way? You think there's no way we could implement a peacekeeping force in the West Bank?
I mean, my question is, if we're putting in the effort to implement a peacekeeping effort, what are they doing to change the way Palestinians interact with us, or the people in the West Bank interact with us?
Well,
so should it just be us who gives? Because I 100% agree that
the idea is that this is part of a negotiation and a step towards peace. The Palestinians of the West Bank would love to see the military gone out of the West Bank. They would love that. So we can negotiate a deal that this peacekeeping force is going to be a combination of trained, Israeli, call them peacekeepers or civilian security force, combined with Palestinian peacekeeping force, and maybe we do also have a fair bit of Israeli Arabs in there because they're kind of like a bridge between our populations. They very well may agree to that because that would mean that the military is gone out of the West Bank. It could be a high-paying job for many Palestinians. So there would be an appeal to join this peacekeeping force. This is something that we should attempt to negotiate. But again, we're not attempting any of this.
We're not attempting much.
No. So, it's hard for me as an Israeli to, and again, we could talk about Palestinians all day and all the wrong they've done, right? So, for example, Hamas gets billions of dollars from the international community, and instead of investing that into building infrastructure and schools and hospitals in Gaza and making Gaza thrive, and that focus, if Hamas focuses on building Gaza and stops the fight against Israel, then ultimately the blockade will eventually end as well, because Israel has no reason to blockade Gaza if there's no threat, right? That's a decision Hamas could make, and that would make the lives of Gazans so much better. That would essentially end our conflict with them. Yeah, it wouldn't liberate their entire land like they want, but it would significantly improve the lives
But
of.
what do they want?
They want to liberate the entire land.
All of Israel, from the river to the sea.
From the river to the sea, exactly. So
that just can't happen.
Correct. There's certain solutions that could potentially work that are seen as one state solutions, like a federation. But again, this is something that's, Israel has never recognized the Palestinian state, by the way, which is interesting. The Palestinian Authority.
There's no Palestinian state.
There's
what? No Palestinian state.
Well, over 100.
Palestinian state was never recognized as a Palestinian state.
Well, just so you know, over 150 countries in the world recognize Palestine as a de jure sovereign state, which means not fully sovereign, but they recognize them as a state. The UN recognizes them as a state, and the UN just happens to be the same body that recognized Israel as a state. So the whole world, most of the world has come to terms with the fact that there is a Palestinian state, albeit not fully sovereign. But even just recognizing the right to a Palestinian state as a good faith measure, we haven't done that. But the Palestinian Authority recognized Israel's right to exist in 1989. Few people know that. So again, there's a whole lot we could do. But let's say we don't agree with the two-state solution. We think that's a risk. We don't want that to happen. Okay, so let's come up with other solutions. Why not a federation? Keep the land whole and turn it into different smaller states or cantons, kind of like the United States or Switzerland, right? This is another interesting solution, but there's no talk about that. There's no interest to try to progress some viable solution. Our approach has been maintain the status quo. And one of the challenges is that there's these 4-year election cycles, so we don't have any visionary that's coming and trying to build a 10, 20-year plan for peace on the land, because they're just trying to get reelected. And the way to do that
is 6 years, we've had like a half a year election plan.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have the ability to look long-term anymore.
It's one of the problems in these term limits. Like I get the point of election cycles and term limits, but I'm not making. I guess I'm making a case against democracy here, that if you have like a benevolent, like a dictator or a monarch, then they have like a 20, 50, 100-year vision that they can carry out. There's some benefit there, but that comes with other challenges.
I mean, Bibi, I feel like definitely thinks he's not in a democracy.
Right. We have shitty leadership, and somehow all too much of the population, they're Rak Bibi, they like him all too much.
Yeah, but the other side of it is that Im lo rak Bibi as me.
I mean, at this point, anybody but Ben Gvir or Smoke.
Yeah, but
I would even prefer Bennett, honestly, at this point. But Bennett actually had an interesting proposal called, and again, I'm not endorsing Bennett, so don't get me wrong here, but he actually had a proposal to reduce the conflict. There was a series of measures in the West Bank to make the conditions there better. Like, great, okay, I love that. whatever it is, we need to start focusing on solutions. We're going to need to make concessions. We need to be bold and courageous if we want any hope to for Israel to continue to thrive. And honestly, I think, look, I'm trying to think of what good can come from the past 8 or so months, and one of them could be that many Israelis were humbled and understand that we're not invincible. Right now, you have hundreds of thousands of civilians have left the north. Israel does not have the means to engage Hezbollah in a meaningful way because we're tied up in Gaza. So we're seeing the limits of our military.
Which is why most of the brigades from Gaza have pulled out and are going north.
Correct, but we still are not really doing much about it. And we still have Hamas is strong in Gaza. We have violence in the West Bank. What if we were to have two more fronts open? What if Syria were to join? What if Iran were to join? Israel does not have the capabilities to deal with that.
Not at all. The United States would have to intervene. Britain would have to intervene.
So our survival is now dependent on the international community, and we see actually these countries are slowly turning against us because their populations are fed up. So there is no guarantee that life for Jews in Israel is going to remain safe. We could have a situation where we're dealing with rocket fire daily for years with no ability to stop it. That is a possibility. So hopefully we've learned that militarism is not what's going to keep us safe, but rather peace will keep us safe. Just one thought about like engaging now in diplomacy. The reason that the ceasefire deal is not being signed, there's really essentially one line of difference that is the disagreement between Israel and Hamas. Israel is agreeing to a lasting ceasefire, while Hamas is asking for a permanent ceasefire. Now, it's unclear what permanent means because it's not like they're recognizing Israel's right to exist and saying permanent means we're going to have peace. But they want a longer term ceasefire than what Israel is agreeing to. Now, this is where the negotiations are breaking down. You hear propaganda saying Hamas keeps rejecting it, but really both Israel and Hamas are rejecting the same amount of ceasefires. They just are not agreeing on the terms. They're rejecting each other's terms, right? The media will then spin it, or depending which media you're reading, some will say Israel rejected it, others will say Hamas rejected it. They're both rejecting the terms of the other. I think Israel should actually up the ante and say, you know what? We don't want a lasting ceasefire. We don't want a permanent ceasefire. We want peace. Okay? Let's sign this peace agreement. We will recognize Palestine's right to exist.
Well, what's in that peace agreement? Because within that peace agreement would be a ceasefire.
Correct.
They would have to agree to ceasefire.
Exactly.
But then we're still talking about exactly the same thing.
Well, no, because if the ceasefire leads to peace and Hamas recognizing Israel's right to exist, then it will be worth it. If it's a permanent ceasefire, it's not really permanent. It's permanent until one side decides to break it. So instead of just continuing the war, a war that we're not going to win, and letting more hostages die in captivity, I think we should up the ante and try to use this as an opportunity to get not only a permanent ceasefire, but a peace agreement on the table. And again, the terms of the agreement wouldn't be fully agreed upon right now, but we could agree on certain first measures and some good faith measures, and then work from there. We could work, as you said, with the international community, putting a lot of pressure on them. The fact that the Middle East is warming up to us is a great sign. You know, who would have thought that Jews are safer in Dubai than they are in New York City?
Or Israel sometimes.
Huh?
Or Israel sometimes.
Yeah. Who would have thought that Saudi Arabia is warming up to us, right? So the Middle East is warming up because they're starting to understand that Israel is not going anywhere, and it's in their best interest to have peace with Israel. Them being involved in this can certainly help. We could put immense pressure on Qatar to pressure Hamas. There's a lot of means we could do to have Hamas make concessions. Now, people say Hamas. Somebody says second eye opening. Hamas will never recognize Israel, though. I actually disagree.
You
I
can
think,
see comments. How come I can't?
yeah, you should be able to see them on the right-hand side.
Nope,
No?
it's empty.
Really? What are you on private chat or comments? There should be a button. Once
Oh, I see comments now.
there we
Damn.
go.
Hi,
Um,
everyone.
yeah. No one's saying anything bad about you, so don't worry. Um, we have a long history. There's a long history of terror organizations becoming more moderate and then becoming legitimate governments. I mean, the PLO is one example. The PLO became the Palestinian Authority and recognized Israel. So I don't agree that they will never. I think we've already seen some change in their language. They updated their charter in 2017 to be much more modern and moderate than the previous charter. I think with the certain pressures from the international community and other Middle Eastern nations, we could have them make more concessions. If we're also able to convince the Gazan population to pressure Hamas, right? Like our policy has always been act in a way act in a way that makes Gazans hate us more than they hate Hamas. That has literally been our actions in Gaza have done just that. Imagine if we act in a way that gets Gazans to see us as those trying to protect and save them and improve their lives rather than the ones that are causing them so much death and destruction. We could get to a situation where the pressure is not only coming from Israel and the international community, but also from within. Um, we have a lot of brilliant people in Israel, and all too much of that brilliance is going towards building weapons and militarism, and not nearly enough is going towards trying to achieve peace. So that's my call to the people of Israel. Um, you know, we have so much potential to not only build this beautiful nation that protects our people, but also that does so much good for the world, as we've already done. Um, so I want us to continue to improve as a nation and find a way to solve this conflict. And again, it takes two to tango, but there's so much we could do. So that's what I like to focus on.
I feel like if Israel gives so many concessions, like how do we know that they'll do the same?
I,
Especially like with the amount of hate and what we spoke about before, with the amount of people who are so radicalized in the way they think.
yeah.
I like don't believe that even if we do come to a way of peace, I don't think like what makes us think that we could stay there.
So first of all, I don't think we should do unilateral concessions. I think, pulling out of Gaza in 2005 was proof of unilateral concessions not being great. Um, but there's been a willingness from both the PA and Hamas to negotiate. So I think the concessions should be um, mutual. Both sides should be making concessions. I think that ultimately, if we can, let's say we could get to a situation where we have a 10-year truce, right? We could negotiate something like that. Imagine we have 10 years of quiet with no violence. It's hard for me to imagine Palestinians wanting to return to a situation where they're facing violence and oppression. People's ideology is not nearly as deep rooted as people think it is. We see public opinion change from year to year depending on who the leaders are and what the environmental conditions are. During Oslo Accords, you had over 50% of Palestinians support the two-state solution. Now it's like around 20%, right? How did that happen? Because people change their minds quite quickly. So I think there's certainly a way forward. I'm not going to say it's easy. There's no sure thing, but our lack of effort that we've put, um, you know, we haven't nearly exhausted all options. We haven't even scratched the surface. So I'd like us to focus on that. And I also want to make it clear that making concessions doesn't equate putting ourselves in danger, right? There's concessions we can make. There's changes we can make that don't put Israelis in danger. Um, Let me even give you a clear example. There's one policy called Mipui, mapping. Israel, for many years, would just, in the middle of the night, go into Palestinian homes. Doesn't matter if they were militants or not, just so they could map out the home, so they could see the floor plan and all of that. This is an invasive, policy that you could say, oh, it makes us safer because we have all this data on the homes and their structures. But in 2019 or something, we decided to stop that policy because I don't know who decided, but good on them. They said it's causing unnecessary harm and the benefit isn't worth it. There's a dozen plus more things we could do in that nature.
I feel like there's 1,000 things that we could probably do that neither our government nor their governments are doing. I think that peace is something that will need to come, but how we see it, I don't think we've even touched on it right now. I don't know. I think like how to find peace is just such a complicated, like, I feel like there's almost like a mean girl, like, perspective on it where like it's possible if one commits to peace, the other won't, no matter what side it is. Especially that one has a charter that the other doesn't, of like pure destruction.
Yeah.
Not to say that that's fully what like will be followed, and I'm not saying that all Palestinians are that way, but it's really hard when you look at something like that to go, all right, let's be peaceful and not assume or take into like consideration the fact that one won't abide by all of the peace regulations or whatever that will be put forward. So I think it's like we're sat at a crossroads where it's like an impossible thing right now.
I would say that I wouldn't use the word impossible. I would say challenging. If we don't believe we can change things, then we certainly can. So having hope.
67 years of like non.
Yeah, well, look, if you look at Zionism, the idea to reestablish a Jewish homeland after thousands of years in exile was considered at the time naive and crazy and unrealistic, and yet we achieved that. So, against all odds, we've achieved great things. To think that
But we achieved, okay. So I'm gonna like go against kind of some of the things that I've been saying throughout this. We achieved having a Jewish homeland sort of at their sake. Like, it's the way that we achieved this didn't go very well.
Yeah,
Although
that's for
achieved,
sure.
which is essentially what
For
I
sure.
think kickstarted what's been 67 years of
Hmm.
what's more like what I assume is worse than what was previous to that in this area.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I do want to take some audience questions because we're closing in on an hour.
yeah, you guys, I just saw that this exists.
Yeah, yeah. So, real quick, second eye
I
opening
don't have an
says,
American accent, Amira.
yeah, you're Canadian. Exactly. Hey,
Also been here forever.
Adar, even based on 2017 charter, they don't. Yeah, that is true. They still don't recognize Israel's right to exist, but it has shown a shift in their framing of things. I actually did a full charter review on this channel that you could check out if you want. It's not, it's not a great charter. There's no denying that, but it's certainly an improvement from the previous one. This is an interesting one. Bas Ulema says Sulha is a blatant display of cognitive dissonance. I really thought in the beginning when I followed Sulha that there is hope. Clearly not. So it's always interesting. Sometimes get these remarks, and you see it often online. Somebody will make a statement about somebody, but not really explain it. Right? It's very easy to say, "Oh, you make bad arguments. Oh, you're wrong. Oh, you have cognitive dissonance." That's easy because you don't need to prove what you're saying. You could just make any statement, like Basul Ulema, you're a pathological liar and a psychopath. That's it. That's end of statement, right? That's clearly like an intellectually shallow way to approach life. And then, the comments, did well. You were asked by two people, both who I believe are Palestinian, not Jews. What do you mean? Can you expand? And your response was, oh, if you were human with a normally functioning brain, figure it out for yourself. I'm not your Shabbos goy. So it sounds like you also do harbor some anti-Jewish sentiment with that remark. But I challenge you and I call on you to actually make a coherent statement, call me out, challenge me on an idea, tell me where you think I have cognitive dissonance, and I will engage with you on your claim. I'm happy to engage, but when you just make claims without explaining them, you can't expect people to take you seriously. So reflect on that, buddy. Let's see. Mutinous says, do Israelis see Zionism today the same way Zeev Jabotinsky saw it? I'm not super well informed on Ziv Jabotinsky and his ideology, but I know that the early Zionists, it was very much about a place where we can self-determine and be safe. And honestly, I think most Zionism is also rooted in that. It's, we want our own homeland where we can control our destiny. In that sense, I think it's quite similar, but I don't know enough to really give you a full explanation. Do you know anything about Ziv Jabotinsky, Jess?
I know that a lot of streets in Israel are named after him.
True, true. Yeah, he actually wrote the essay, what was it, the Iron Wall, Iron Curtain? Yeah, I actually haven't read that. I haven't read that. No, that's the Cold War thing. What was Ziv Jabotinsky's essay? Ziv Jabotinsky. No, was it not him? Iron Wall. Yeah, he wrote the Iron Wall, which was an essay about Zionism. You know what? I'll read it. Maybe I'll even read it on a live stream. What happened? The stream's gone. I can't see anything. Hold on, I'm refreshing. I might disappear for a moment. Huh. Okay, technical difficulties. Mutinous says there's 98 streets named after Jabotinsky. Interesting. Okay, let's see. So Basul Ulema responded to my challenge by saying, "I did not expect less, man. Bravo." Okay, we see your intellectual capacity on full display here. Thanks for engaging. Okay, Basul Ulema says, "Why would it be so hard to live in Palestine like your forefathers did for centuries?" Thank you, Bas. Finally, we're talking about ideas. I appreciate that. Um, so, and also, we're in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have Louis Fishman on, who's actually a scholar on the topic of late Ottoman Palestine and the relationship between Jews and Palestinians. So I will be much more informed on the topic after that conversation. That being said, I do have
Like, what does that mean, though? Like, we revert to what was,
yeah.
and
He wants there to be no Israel and for Jews to just live in
yeah,
Palestine.
I think that that's just not even possible at this point in terms of like where Israel as a country has gotten itself to, and as people, and like it just can't be like, what do we let down all walls, everybody runs free, and now we recall it Palestine and do what with the government, like, or do we allow the Palestinian Authority to be the government of all of Israel, rename Israel Palestina, and
Yeah,
call it
it's unrealistic idealism that just gets in the way of us making progress because it's
right?
but
That's
let's actually break it down. So before the establishment of the state of Israel, Jews were living on the land in relative peace with their Palestinian neighbors, but Jews were second-class citizens. We were dhimmis. We weren't equal to Palestinians. We weren't equal living on the land under Palestinians. Jews have no intention to go back to that. That's one. Two, to think that after 100 years of conflict, with the amount of hate, mistrust, and fear we have of one another, to think that we could go back to where we were is very unrealistic.
just brush your hands off and walk away.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Now, I do understand the ideal of one state for all people, kumbaya, we all live together. The idealist in me wants that. And I actually think there's ways we could achieve something similar in the form of a federation. Imagine we have the Federation of Israel and Palestine. It's one state split up into 20 smaller states or cantons. There's a lot of localized control. So Palestinians can determine how they want to run their communities. Jews can determine how they want to run their communities. This also can help the tension between the secular and ultra-Orthodox. We're not competing over national policy, more so over local policy. You'll need to have some kind of a sophisticated system of checks and balances to make sure that there's not a compete for demographic control. Maybe you have a parliament that is exactly 50% Palestinian, 50% Jewish, right? There's a sophisticated way to do this, but this whole idea is Israel gone, Palestine exists, and Jews will be safe on the land. It's not realistic, and it's not going to happen. So it's great. It's important to ground our activism and our ideas in pragmatism and reality.
I need to take a minute break, if that's okay.
Yeah.
All
Sure.
right, I'll be back in a second.
I'll keep going on the question. Yeah.
Go for it.
Cool. Let's see. Literature recommendations and thoughts regarding historical narratives read Nakba, especially critical of Papin, not Papin, Ilan Pape's work, and how clarifying this narrative could help both sides to de-radicalize. So from the research I've done on the Nakba, it seems like Benny Morris really is the number one scholar on the topic. Um, I don't know if I agree with all of his conclusions, but he's done a lot of work. He's certainly not as dogmatic as someone like Ilan Pape, or even I don't think his bias is as strong as someone like Rashid Khalidi. So I would maybe start with Benny Morris, but I would also try to get a fuller picture by seeing what Pape is saying and what people like Khalid Rashidi are writing on it. Um, I would also look for independent articles of people summarizing it. Like even Wikipedia, I think you could get a relatively good understanding. You could also, ChatGPT can help, although engage ChatGPT carefully because sometimes it'll just lie. So yeah, that's how I would approach it. Um, let's see where else. Didn't know. Nico, Jess is back. Welcome back. Nika says, Adar, I like the ideas that you discussed in here. How do you say it would be possible to implement the Peace Corps, for example? Yeah, I mean, I think this needs to be a negotiation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. It could be part of a greater plan to normalize ties and to work towards some kind of Palestinian state or federation or confederation. But one of the terms of the negotiation will be we will withdraw the IDF from the West Bank and we're going to replace it with a civilian police force that is mixed with Israelis and Palestinians. And yeah, so it should be part of a greater negotiation. Um, and let's just throw some other things that we can agree to do. The Palestinian Authority can agree to stop paying the families of terrorists, and Israel can agree to stop demolishing the homes of terrorists. Right, like that's just another balanced, good faith measure we could do. We could release nonviolent prisoners. We could both decide to have a more favorable education about the other side. Yeah, just some ideas. And again, I'm just one dude throwing out ideas. The collective effort of many people working on this will be able to produce a far more thorough plan than just myself, right? So if what I'm saying sounds compelling, imagine what we could do collectively. Uh, Listen to the Martyr Made podcast. You will learn a lot. I mean, sure, I'll check that out. I don't have much time for podcasts, but once in a while.
Except the one you're on.
Hmm?
Except the one you're on.
Yeah, exactly. I don't watch it back, you know. But yeah. Is it, so Delilah says, "Nah, it's the same argument white South Africa had when apartheid ended." Okay, I'm not sure why people bring up apartheid as like a good example. It's not. South Africa is not doing well. You have a decreasing white population in South Africa. Crime rate has exploded. Israel will look at South Africa and say, "Fuck no, we're not going to do that." So it's not a good example. And I think the conditions are different. I think that if you look at South Afrikaners' primary means of resistance, it wasn't violent and it wasn't targeted towards civilians. They had a much more nonviolent, a much more energy behind nonviolent resistance than historically what Palestinian resistance has had. So I don't think it's going to play out exactly the same way, and even if it did, I don't think it's so favorable. So I don't know if that's a good example. Um, So Boss says you pay taxes to not go to war and you are protected by the Caliph. So you're making the case that we should want to be second class citizens. So I think that's equally as detestable as Israelis that think Palestinians should be second class citizens. We should find a way where we could all be equal on the land and live in peace with one another. So roughly Galaxy says Palestinians were second-class citizens as well because they were colonized by the British. Yeah, but I'm not talking about the British Mandate of Palestine. I'm talking about Ottoman Palestine. And look, let's be very real here. Point to me one country in the Middle East that has great minority rights. Seriously. Like, as much as we could criticize Israel and how we could improve minority rights in Israel, Israel has better minority rights than virtually all other Middle Eastern countries. Like, let's just be very honest about that. So, let's be honest and let's be realistic in what we're suggesting here. Nomad says, instead of thinking about the kingdom of Israel more than 2,000 years ago, or thinking about pre-19th century before Zionism, I think the most important thing to consider is the fact that right now, around half Palestinians on the land are Jews. Half the population are Jews in Palestine. Yeah, I agree. I think it's better to focus on the now than the past. We could learn from the past, but we can't go back to the past. Could it be treated? Could it be that Palestinians are treated worse now than dhimmis were treated in Ottoman times? Yeah, I actually think West Bank Palestinians and Gazan Palestinians, their lives compared to Israelis, there's a significantly larger gap in their lives than there were between Jews when they were dhimmis. I would say that's the case. If you look at Israeli Arabs or Palestinian citizens of Israel, they are more equal to Jewish Israelis than dhimmis were to pre-Ottoman or to Ottoman Palestinians. Let's see. Amir goes, question: one state secular democratic that celebrates both Jewish and Palestinian traditions would work. If it's a federation, as I said, I think it could work. One state like that's not split up into smaller states, I don't think would work. And also just look at like something like 15% of Palestinians actually support one secular democratic state. It's a very unpopular position in Palestinian society. So it's interesting how in the West how popular it is when if you actually just talk to the people on the land, that they don't want it. So I think the best way is to look at what people generally want and try to find a way to work with their current desires. I don't want to say it can't work, but I think there's much more viable solutions. Yeah, Downey says South Africa is not as bad as the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jess, if you see a question that you want to address, feel free to.
I actually think there's a lot of questions here that have a lot more information than I know about. So I've kind of been writing some of them down so I can do my own research eventually.
Delilah clarifies, says that was not my point. White South Africans thought black population were going to be violent against them when apartheid ended. That's why many white South Africans left because of this thought. Well, there is a lot of violence towards white South Africans. I have seen somebody contest it and say it's not specifically against white South Africans, it's against all Africans. It's become more violent. It's not specifically whites. And then I tried to look at data to reinforce this, and they conveniently don't have, I say conveniently, quite sarcastically, but they don't have data breaking down violence against whites versus blacks. And it seems like they don't want to do that because they don't want to fuel racial tensions. But so regardless of if there's more violence against whites because whites are specifically targeted, or if it's just there's more violence in general, it doesn't make much of a difference. It's not an example of a solution that really worked. But I do think if we were to look at the data, I would think that there is some level of animosity and desire for revenge against white South Africans. White South Africans are still disproportionately wealthy. Whenever you have a minority group that's disproportionately wealthy, there's hate against that group. Jews know this very well. So yeah. Did you ever? Question to Jess: did you ever go to the West Bank and interact with Palestinians?
I came on a trip before I moved here when I was 16, and yeah, I went to dinner in the West Bank at a Palestinian's house. The goal of like the dinner was to see that like we can interact and be peaceful with each other. At the time, like I said, I was 16 years old. I had no idea really what was going on between Palestinians of the West Bank and Israel. So I had no questions. I asked no questions. I had a really great dinner. They're people just like me and you, and that's what I walked away from it with.
Cool. Ibn Saifi says Arabs in Israel between 1948 and 1966 were under direct military rule and their movement severely restricted. This is important point to know. Yeah, that's very few Israelis know that, by the way, that they were under military rule. They had curfew. The conditions have increased quite significantly. Like right now, and again, I'm not saying that it's perfect. There's definitely domestic work to do to strengthen ties between Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel, and just to create a greater sense of equality. But we've seen steady progress in most regards. 50% of doctors in Israel are either Druze, not Jews, Druze, which is another ethnic minority group, and Palestinian citizens of Israel, 50%, when they only make up 20% of the population. So they're highly overrepresented in medical fields. We just had the first Palestinian in the government coalition, right? So Palestinians are more engaged in the political process than they've been. They're getting to higher levels of, there's a Palestinian in the Supreme Court. They're reaching higher levels of power. There's NGOs working to bring more Palestinian citizens of Israel into tech. So we're seeing steady progress there. And this should give us hope of what peaceful coexistence can look like. Like if you go to the north of Israel, I mean, it's beautiful. It's not that it's interesting because there's like segregation in the sense that you have Jewish towns and Palestinian towns, but it's by choice. And there's free travel between them. I could go into an Arab town with feeling safe and go into any shop I want and get greeted with a smile, and it's all good vibes. Palestinians are very hospitable people, and you feel that when you go to their towns. Again, if you go in the West Bank, you need to be careful. Not all towns are would be as hospitable to Jews or Israelis, but in the north of Israel and other places in Israel, you see a beautiful example of coexistence. And
Central Israel is a beautiful, like we have coexistence here as well.
Yeah. Coexistence with challenges. There is deep racism. There's a lot of fear of Palestinians.
There's deep racism everywhere, and not just about Jews or Palestinians. Like
Yeah, that's true. I think it's a little stronger here because we are
not to say the one is okay because the other.
Yeah. And we're in active conflict with Palestinians, so there's a lot of fear of Palestinians, and that spills over to fear or hate of Israeli Arabs. It's a natural spillover, but it's something that needs to be addressed and dealt with. Let's see. Why then true Torah Jews, as of now, oppose the Zionist state? Wasn't that religious decree forbidding to return and establish it? So most religious Jews are actually Zionists, more so than myself even. You do have Naturi Karta and a few other sects that are anti-Zionist, and it's for that reason. They believe that we are still in exile, even living on the land, we're still in exile, and that we cannot control our own state until the Messiah returns. These anti-Zionist Jews most of them are not actually pro-Palestinian the way it's perceived. They just don't think Jews should rule the land. Then you do have some that actually are actively pro-Palestinian. You see them doing protests that say free Palestine and stuff like that. But this isn't the minority. This isn't the majority. It's a relatively small minority.
Okay, guys. Unfortunately, I have to go out.
All good, Jess. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your podcast. It was a great first time experience.
Look, I'm happy you challenged me to a debate or a friendly conversation, and just I want to put it out there that if anyone wants to engage, reach out. We're very much open. You don't need to be some activist or influencer or politician to be on the show. we do sometimes bring those people on, but we very much like just having people come together for conversations. We need more of that. So Jess, thank you so much.
We
And
can all learn from each other, whether we're on the same side or different sides. There's an abundance of education. So thanks for having me, and I will talk to you soon.
thank you, Jess. Talk soon.
Bye, guys.
Cool. I'll do probably another 10 or so minutes and then we'll wrap it. Boss goes, but it was majority before 1948 in it. What happened? Boss, so are you, I'm just gonna make a guess. Are you a British Muslim? That's from the in it, but yeah, interested in knowing. Unless you're not comfortable sharing your identity. Before 1948, I actually don't know. That's an interesting question. I would need to look into that. Were the majority of ultra-Orthodox Jews anti-Zionist before 1948? I'm not sure if somebody else has information on that. Feel free to share it. My guess, I don't know. I don't even know how to guess it. I'm not well versed. I do have ultra-Orthodox in my family. Like many people don't know this. Me being an agnostic Jew, I come from a long lineage of famous rabbis and just a religious family. So I have what you call yichus, which is Yiddish for, I don't know, street cred. Whenever I am in certain Hasidic communities and I tell them my family lineage, they try to get me married in. Try to get me married in to the family, and then I tell them I'll do it if I could be like King Solomon and have 1,000 wives, and then they very quickly rescind their offer to marry me into the family. So that's my strategy to get them, get them to rescind their offer. Cool. Con ODs. Am I fully Ashkenazi? I'm 99.8% Ashkenazi. That 0.2 is Anatolian, which is Turkey these days. So yeah, pretty pure, pretty pure. What could Israel change today to improve the lives of West Bank Palestinians? So one of them we mentioned on the stream multiple times about changing the military with the peacekeeping force. Um, uh, we could do things to improve the economy. We could help them be more sufficient. We could maybe incentivize. This is an interesting idea. Incentivize Israeli companies in the West Bank to hire more Palestinians. Maybe they'll get a tax break for doing so. Maybe some cultural days, some events that are trying to connect Israelis and Palestinians through sports. Try to build a shared culture through music and art. I'm really just, improvising now, coming up with ideas, but there's just so much, like even doing all that would significantly change the situation on the ground. Also holding settlers accountable, like a settler needs to know that if they attack a Palestinian, they're a terrorist just the same way if a Palestinian attacks a Jew. Treat them the same way. My country before 1940 had one Jew on 3 people. Was that one Jew for every 3 people? So a third of the population? Is that what you're saying? I don't know if I clarify, because I don't know if any country ever had a third Jews aside from Israel. I'd actually be interested in seeing that. But who knows? Maybe Poland. You know that Poland before the Holocaust had more Jews than the entire Middle East and North Africa. Someone fact check me on that, but I read that somewhere. That's fascinating. What stories do you have in the family of life in Palestine with the Palestinians during Mandate and Ottoman times? So as I mentioned, I'm not an expert on this yet. I know that Israelis were second-class citizens, or Jews were second-class citizens, but I also know that they were living in relative peace. It was better to be a Jew in Ottoman Palestine than it was to be a Jew in Europe. But in 2 or 3 weeks, we're going to have Louis Fishman on, who's an expert on this topic, and then we'll all get better informed. Should Israel do a formal recognition of the Nakba as an olive branch type act of reconciliation? Yes, I do think so, but I think it should be part of a greater peace agreement. I think if it's done unilaterally, it's not going to move the needle. If anything, it'll just seen as like weakness. If it's part of a greater peace deal, then 100% acknowledging the wrongdoings of the past, or not even the like not only the wrongdoings, but just the actions that caused the others harms, right? Acknowledging that, like showing a level of empathy for the other side, I think will go a long way. And this should work both ways, like a recognition that the Hebron massacre was bad, right? That would go a long way. Condemning violence from on both sides would go a long way. Let's see. Bosco's mostly Sephardic Jews, and when Ashkenazi Jews arrived, they had to build their own synagogue because they did not want to pray with Udermensch Jews. If Israelis know that. Okay. What country are you talking about? Yes, educate yourself, brah. Such a shame you guys do not know the history of Bosnia and Albania, but you hold tight to Poland and Ukraine, which per native countries. We did not do genocide. Genocide happened to us. So you're Bosnian, is that what you're saying? You're saying Bosnian was a third Jewish? Is that what you're saying? What percentage of Bosnia was Jewish at its peak? I'm asking ChatGPT. It might give me false information, but hopefully it gives me a source. Okay, but even if it's wrong by hundreds of percent, at its peak, the Jewish population of Bosnia was a small minority. The Jewish community in Bosnia reached its highest population before World War II. In interwar period, Bosnia had approximately 14 to 15,000 Jews, which constitute 0.4% of the total population. So I'm not sure if Bosnia is what you're talking about. Certainly not a third. What did you do? Have you heard of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast in Russia? Hardly any Jews live there today, but still publish Hebrew newspaper. Interesting. Where is that? Can you send a link? The Israeli G. Why are we talking about future peace plans when the Palestinians refuse peace at any chance they got? Why? Because the alternative is to continue to live by the sword, and we see that where that leads us to. We see it to 1,200 dead Israelis on October 7th, a few hundred more since then, hundreds of thousands of Israelis not living in their homes in the north. The main drivers of the Israeli economy are slowly leaving. Israel is not thriving currently, and this is the result of us living by the sword and not being engaged in the peace process. There's a song by, I think, Aaliyah. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Our survival depends on us achieving peace on the land. So us not succeeding means absolutely nothing. It just means we need to continue to try and try harder than we've ever tried. And we have been relatively close. It's not like we haven't been close. We have been. I mentioned this earlier. During Oslo, over 50% of Palestinians supported a two-state solution. Now that number is in the 20s. Okay, it just shows that given the right conditions, given the right deal on the table, we could get Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to exist, and we haven't even scratched the surface in the attempts we've made. Ibn, thanks for that autonomous zone. I am going to look into that. That's interesting. Have you seen Two Nice Jewish Boys on YouTube? They're really right wing. I think if you talk to them, it would be an interesting. Yeah, I've heard of them. Who are these guys? Hold on, let me just. My computer's about to die. Too nice. Okay, yeah, I've seen these guys. Yeah, I'd gladly speak to them either on this channel or theirs. I wonder if they'd be open to engaging, but I'll reach out. The Israeli G responds by saying, actually, us believing that we can make peace with people who want us dead got us this far. We could have solved this whole conflict back in 1948 if we looked reality in the eyes. Actually, no, because right now we're in one of the most challenging situations we've been in our entire history as a country, and this is after 15 years of no effort on peacemaking whatsoever. So this is not believing we can make peace. This is entirely neglecting the peace process and maintaining the status quo. That's what got us to this situation. And yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is like if we just ethnically cleanse more Palestinians or genocide of them, then we wouldn't have a conflict. Yeah, that's true. One solution is really to kill all Palestinians, but I don't take I don't take that as an actual serious as a viable solution. And people who suggest that also shouldn't be taken seriously. Generally speaking, here's a good rule of thumb: if you're calling for genocide, you're not relevant. That's I think a good rule of thumb. And maybe that's not what you're implying, but it sounds like that is what you're implying. If they wanted a two-state solution, then why is Arafat a Palestinian hero for rejecting the agreement? Sounds like a case of cherry picking. That's not why he's a solution. That's not why he's a hero. So I would suggest you actually look more into why Arafat is praised. It's really because he helped put the Palestinian cause on the map. He helped bring it to the global stage and got a lot of eyes on this conflict. That's generally why he's seen as a hero, not for rejecting the two-state solution. Now, that's true that the 50% that didn't want a two-state solution would like him for rejecting that. That's for sure. Ibn says, "Gotta go. Really enjoyed this. Take care. Take care. Thanks for joining." You must be aware that half of the world is still regarding Israel as so-called state. No, more than half the world. Virtually the entire world, aside from just a few countries, recognize Israel as a state. There's maybe a max of a dozen countries that don't. So yeah. Hold on one second. I have someone here. Sorry, just the repairman's here, but the show goes on.
You have a back.
Okay. Um, Danny Ashid, what do you think of the idea of building a bigger and robust platform to allow Israelis and Palestinians to talk to each other? Yeah, I think in general it's a great idea that we need more of. Are you asking if I want to do that on this channel? Yeah, I'd love to. The challenge is, I'm an entrepreneur building a company. I'm very busy. I actually have two companies. One I'm not so active in, but the other one takes most of my time. So I'm limited in how much I could focus on this. I make a great effort to do one stream a week and a few tweets here and there, an occasional video. But yeah, if I have more time, I'll dedicate more time on this. And if I could get funding through maybe enough Patreon support or through ad revenue, I get like $150 a month from ad revenue. Woo, we're rich. And then like another 100 a month from Patreon, right? So like this channel creates $250 revenue. That doesn't really allow me to hire somebody to help take this to the next level. So can I do this slow and steady grind for who knows how much longer and build it to the point where we're doing a few $1,000s a month in revenue, and then I would just invest that money into hiring somebody who could really take this to the next level? That's one vision I have, but it's going to take time. That being said, on that note, if anybody does want to support on Patreon, there's a link in the description on how to do that. We also take PayPal donations. So yeah, that's the idea. And also, I've thought about getting a grant. It's just getting a grant is a lot of work, and I just have not found the time to do that. If anybody actually wants to help get a grant, I would even pay like, let's say 10% commission on whatever money's brought in. So if you want to be involved in helping this channel get a grant, reach out to me. You could also find my contact information in the description. Definitely happy to explore that. Because honestly, I really think if we have like a good grant writer and we put effort, we could get like 50 to 100K for this work. And then we could really take it to the next level, do like high quality content, in-person interviews, all sorts of good stuff. Cool. Boss ends it on a nice, lighthearted, funny note. Ask APAC. I'm sure they're going to support you. Yeah, I'm sure. Anyways, thank you all so much. This was great. Do I take Bitcoin as a donation? Yeah. I'm a big into crypto. I know you messaged me on Twitter recently. I'll send you a Bitcoin address if you're interested. Very much appreciated. And yeah, I'll be back next week with some stream, either a call-in show or some interview or debate. I'm still trying to see what the next stream will be. And yeah, sending much love, guys.